The Tabernacle of David, Burnsville, Minnesota presents a special video production. Bill Cloud. The Father's Heart, Mercy, and Compassion.
What I'm going to do today is most likely going to overlap at the very least on some of what we discussed last time I was here. Is anyone that's here today, you weren't here last time I was in town? Let me see your hands. Okay, where were you at? I'm just playing with you. Anyway, I'm probably going to get into some things that are going to overlap what we did last time. I kind of have an idea of what we did. And so if I do repeat myself, and you're tempted to, in your mind, say, why is he talking about the same thing? You remember that many times Messiah talked about the same thing over and over again. Now, why did he do that? I think it's the same reason we go to our children and say, how many times am I going to have to tell you this? Because we are, as his children, sometimes hard of hearing and, yes, stubborn and hard-headed. And he has to tell us these things again and again. In fact, I'm convinced that most of Scripture is the Creator saying the same thing over and over and over again, just using different people, different situations, circumstances, but essentially the same story again and again and again. So that being said, I want you to turn with me to the book of Hebrews. And we're going to focus on Hebrews chapter 12, but we're going to start in Hebrews chapter 11. Because in Hebrews 11, a lot of people refer to chapter 11. Well, if I would ask you in a word, what is Hebrews chapter 11 about? What would you say? Faith. Emunah. Faith. And some people refer to Hebrews chapter 11 as the hall of faith. Because by faith Noah, by faith Abel, by faith Abraham, by faith Isaac, and all these different personalities who, because of their trust and their confidence and their faith in the Almighty, they developed into and became these people that we read about and we go, wow, I wish I could be more like that. So as it begins, verse 1 says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for. And I want to interject this point here. Or let's put it in the form of a question. Do you know what you hope for? According to Scripture, what do you hope for? Paul says you hope for what you do not see. Because if you could see it, there would be no need to hope for it. So you hope for what you do not see. So then faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. And by faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. Which is just to say that everything we see consists of something we can't see. Do you see? So then how are all these people motivated? By faith. And faith is the substance of something you really can't see. My point here is this. They were not motivated by what they knew. They were not motivated by what they understood. Most of the time they were motivated by what they could not see. And so then we come over here to verse 13. It says that these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Now, the one that stands out head and shoulders to me is Abraham, of course. Because by faith, Abraham did these things. He was told to leave his country, his family, his father's house, and to go to a land that I will show you. At that point, not even being certain of where he was going. But faith is what motivated him to do that. Not intellect, but faith. And through the story of Abraham and others, here's what I glean. That these people that we look and we read their account and we see how God used them in different ways, it occurs to me that God has never chosen perfect people. Never. But God always perfects those that He has chosen. And I say that because the same Creator who chose Abraham for his day is the same Creator who chose Noah for his day, is the same Creator who chose Paul for his and David for his, is the same one who chose you and I to be here at this appointed time. Messiah said that there would come a day that would be unlike anything the world had ever seen before or would ever see again. I'm of the opinion that we may be living in those days. I mean, is there anyone besides me that believe we're living in the last days? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me just see. I think most everyone does. Okay? Now, that is not to be translated that we believe Messiah is returning next week. That's not what I'm talking about. But we believe we're living in the last days. And so we may very well be, and I kind of believe we are, that generation that He spoke of, that they would be unlike anything the world has ever seen or will ever see again. And considering that the Creator has always worked through people from the beginning, that would seem to suggest that in those days there would be need for a people unlike anything the world has ever seen or will ever see again. And if you and I are living in that day and time, then it would seem that you and I were chosen to come into the kingdom for such a time as this. Meaning we have a great responsibility to this day and time, and to this generation, and to people we don't even know. Now, if that's accurate, it's troubling to me every time I look in the mirror. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm really glad He knows what He's doing. And I'm really glad that He is in control. If we're those people. But now I go back to my previous statement. He has never chosen perfect people, but He has always perfected those that He chooses. And how does He often perfect them? Trials, tests, tribulations. And so then we come to Hebrews chapter 12. Let me go back to Abraham for just a second and make this point. It says of Abraham that because he believed God, it was accounted unto him as righteousness. But there are times and places in his life that he didn't believe God all the way. An example of that is when he went to Egypt in Genesis 12. There was famine in the land. He went to Egypt. He told the Egyptians that Sarah was his sister, not his wife, which wasn't totally a lie. It just wasn't totally the truth. And if it's not totally the truth, then it's totally a lie. And he is the one, because of his desire for self-preservation. I mean, that's what it was. He was fearful that they were going to take his life. So, get it, what I'm saying here. He had faith to leave country, family, father's house. He had faith to go to a land that God would show him. But when he felt like his life was in danger, there's where his faith fell short. And he's the one that put Sarai in that very precarious situation. And by the way, he is not the one who came to defend her honor. That was the Creator. I've had some gentlemen want to come up to me after I make it this point and say, well, you know, everything turned out okay. Turned out, yeah. He got all these gifts and presents, including an Egyptian handmaid by the name of Hagar that was given to Sarai. And what is the consequence of that? Ishmael. And how is that working out for everybody today? So there are ramifications. But when we jump ahead into his life, into Genesis 22, and he goes to the top of Mount Moriah, and he offers there not only his only son, but the promise. The promise. In Isaac shall your seed be called. In no other, but in Isaac. And so he is willing not only to give his only son that he loves, but he is willing to give back to the Creator the very promise. Because if Isaac dies, the promise dies with it. But because he believed God, not because he understood Him all the time, but because he believed Him, it was accounted unto him as righteousness. Are you tracking with me here? That's what he was looking for. And by the way, after Genesis 22, we do not see Abraham being tested anymore. Because all along, Abraham serves as the prototype of what the Creator is looking for, in that you and I were born again, and I'll relate his born again experience, if you'll let me put it that way, to God calling him out of Babylon, calling him to leave family, country, father's house. But that was just the beginning of the process. The culmination of the process, more or less, was in Genesis 22, when the Creator says of him, "Now I know that you are a man who fears God, and that you have not withheld your only son from me." And so there was no reason to test him further, because there was nothing more that Abraham could give up. And so the reason you and I are born again is so that we can learn how to die. Every day. More and more. Frankly, I'm over the discussion about pork chops and bacon and shrimp. I'm over the discussion about tinsel on trees and colored eggs in the springtime. Because what we're part of, ladies and gentlemen, is far more than these things. Giving up your shrimp cocktail, that's pretty easy. Even Muslims do that. But we are called to give up everything. And most of what we hold on to are the things that no one else sees. I mean, it's really easy to wear tzitzit, invoke Hebrew terms and names, and quit putting a Christmas tree up. That's relatively simple to giving up what's really inside me. Now, here's where I'm getting into this. Oddly enough, not oddly enough, on purpose. This week's Torah portion, Shoftim. If you're following the traditional Torah portion, or Torah cycle, I should say. But anyway, the Torah portion that a lot of us have been studying this week is Shoftim, judges. The Creator says you'll appoint judges over you. And what are they supposed to do? Judge. And how are they to judge? Justly. They are not to pervert justice. In fact, the root term shafat, it carries with it the idea of creating order, which would insinuate that if there was not righteous judgment, there would be chaos. In other words, if we had people in position of judging unjustly, perverting justice, going on their opinion or their feelings or their emotions, what would we end up with? Basically what we've got going out here in the world. But what have we got going on in the Messianic movement? So if we have chaos within the body, should I conclude that we may have people judging unjustly? Perverting justice, perhaps? Creating chaos? Of course, now we haven't appointed any judges. It's just that we have a lot of self-appointed judges. Now, there is this time when the Messiah says, "Judge not, lest you be judged." Because with the judgment that you measure out, that's the judgment that you're going to be judged with. And I've always understood that to mean this. He wasn't telling us don't judge situations necessarily. He was just saying you better be very careful how you judge. Because if you judge righteously, justly, and I would add to that, he's not having a good day, is he? I mean, that was classic drama right there. I hope you saw that. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, well, I hope it gets better, buddy. Somehow or another, I've got to get it back in the zone, you know. Anyway, what he said was, you better be careful about how you judge. In fact, the word it's used in Greek there is where we get our word critic from. Insinuating that be very slow to criticize. So I guess what I'm trying to get across here is, if we're going to judge a situation, we better have all the facts, and we better judge righteously. And I would also suggest that maybe we should be in a position to pass judgment. And if we're not in a position, it might be best to keep our mouths shut. Because if we go off and criticize and judge without all of the facts, or if we're just critical in general, and the Creator is just, when He metes out judgment, if I've been critical, if I've been quick to judge without all the facts, how will I be judged? Here's why this is very important, ladies and gentlemen. I believe with my whole heart, now this is just my opinion, but I believe with my whole heart that judgment has come to God's house. See, we talk about judgment coming to the world, and we believe it will. But where does judgment begin? He judges us first. And we'll get back to this point a little later and why I believe He has to judge us first. But for right now, I want to say I am convinced that judgment has come to His house. And by that I mean, how does He perfect those that He has chosen? Trials, tests. Sometimes we don't do the tests so well. You know, when I was in school, particularly elementary school, my favorite part of the day was recess. I could do that. I excelled at it, you know, and that's when you get to run, jump, and shout. By the way, I was Pentecostal, so that fit in quite well. But a lot of times, and especially in the 3rd and 4th grade, I confused recess time with, say, math time. You know, they overlapped a lot in my mind. All right, so consequently, I spent a good deal of time in the principal's office during those years, and he and I got to know one another very well. However, as a result of that, there was a lot of things the teacher was going over in class while I was elsewhere I didn't hear. I didn't get in on that conversation. And so I had a problem when it came time to take the test. There were things on that test I didn't know about. And I'll never forget, this is in 3rd grade, I'm taking a test, and everything's quiet, and I asked the teacher, I don't know any of this. Can you help me out? Can you give me some help here with these questions? And the teacher ignored me. Acted like I'd never even spoken a word. So I asked her again. And again. And finally, she just said, take your test. And that's all she said. And so I realized, that while you're taking the test, the teacher doesn't speak. Let me say that again. While you're taking the test, the teacher typically does not speak. Why? Because the teacher wants to know, what have you learned? Probably more importantly, what you have not. Because I never remember a teacher going over with me the things I got right on the test. It was always the things I didn't get right. And why? Because the teacher knew those things were going to be on a future test. And another test. And another test. Until finally, I internalized those things. And I learned those things. Because you see, the teacher knew that these foundational things were very important if I was going to progress and mature and eventually graduate. And that wasn't going to happen if I just skimmed over these things and really didn't learn it. I mean, in our world today, they're turning out kids out of high school who can't read and write. And how is that working out for culture? Well, my point, I guess, is the Creator doesn't do that. Have you noticed that there have been times in your life where you're forced to pray, Father, forgive me of this again? Anybody besides me and Him? And we like to think that we'll never, ever do that again, or we'll never, ever say that again. And we come back after a season and find that the same old thing is popping up in our life. Again, is that just me? And so, ladies and gentlemen, if judgment has come to God's house, and I'm convinced it has, then it's not about how long your tzitzit are. It's not how much Hebrew you know. It's what's in here. What's that thing in here that would keep you from loving Him with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength? And probably you and He have had discussions about this before. I know I have. It's really easy to say, oh, I love Him with all my heart, all my soul, all my strength. That's easy to say. And I think when we do that, we mean it. The problem is, there's this guy who said to the Messiah, if all men deny you, I would never deny you. And I think he meant it when he said it. Problem is, the Creator knew just what kind of an environment had to be created in order to expose what was really in His heart. And by the way, when He did deny the Messiah, why did He do it? To save His life. It's funny what people will do and say when they feel like their life is in danger. Then you really get to see who and what they are. Now, compare that reality with what is said in Revelation chapter 12 about those who overcome. They overcame by the blood of the Lamb, the word of their testimony, and loved not their lives to death. So it seems to me, ladies and gentlemen, if we're living in the days we think we're living, if we are that generation that has been called to live in this time, to be His witnesses, to be His ambassadors, to be overcomers, then we have to get to the place that not only do we have the testimony of the Messiah, not only are we keeping His commandments, but we have to get to the place where we can sincerely pray and mean, not my will, but your will be done. And what I'm sharing with you is simple, it's basic, you've heard this all your lives, but now things are unfolding all around us that seem to suggest we are at that place. And so in Hebrews 12, verse 1, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, and I believe the cloud of witnesses are all those people he just mentioned in chapter 11, those who were not perfect, but those who were perfected. And again, how were they perfected typically? God allowed them to go through trials. He allowed them to be pressed and squeezed. He says, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And so I want to expound just a bit on this verse here. I want you to imagine an old-fashioned scale. You know, the one that's got a tray and the 3 chains, and a tray over here with the 3 chains, and you got the scale. All right? And it's to measure out things. Now, we're going to call this the scale of justice. And when the Creator, who is the only righteous judge, He is just. When He describes Himself to Moses, He says that He's compassionate, He's merciful, and that He extends mercy to those who love Him and who keep His commandments to 1,000 generations. Is that right? All right. So the one tray on this scale of justice, let's call it mercy. And we're going to put 1,000 generations on that side of the scale. Are you with me here? But now He in no wise will allow the guilty to go unpunished, visiting the iniquity unto the 3rd and 4th generations. Is that right? So this tray we'll call judgment. And we're going to put how many generations over here? 4. Let's go ahead and put 4. Put the top number there. So 4 generations over here, 1,000 generations over here. Which way does the scale of justice tilt? It's not even close, is it? It's overwhelmingly toward mercy. So how does the Creator describe Himself to us? Merciful. How should we perceive Him? Merciful. Now, how should people perceive us? I mean, would they have to guess? Should they have to guess? Should it be, It's going back here. We're really sure which way it's going to tilt yet. Or should it be just like he is, overwhelmingly toward mercy? What do you think? It got real quiet. Because we're supposed to emulate him, aren't we? We're supposed to be like him, right? I mean, Messiah is the personification. He is the example that is set before us of how we're supposed to be. So again, I don't think it should be that people should have to guess where we are in this. They should see that we are overwhelmingly tilted toward mercy because that's where he is. I guess I've made my point. And all we have to do is compare ourselves to what we're supposed to be to see where we're falling short here. Now, I can't ignore the fact that he does judge. And there does come a time to judge. And I'll go back to Abraham, when he was still Abram, to make this point. When Abram came into the land of Canaan, who lived there? Canaanites. That wasn't a trick question. Sometimes referred to as the Amorites, all right? But the Canaanites lived there. Now, I don't recall the Creator telling Abram to wipe them all out. He didn't say kill man, woman, and child. And yet, 400 years later, when Joshua and the children of Israel were coming back into the land of Canaan, what did he tell that generation? Wipe them out. What had changed? When Abram was in the land in his day, it says that the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. Now, what did he mean by that? Here's what I think it means. On their scale, and how he was dealing with them, it's still extended toward mercy. But you know what they were doing for 400 years? They were piling up more weight in this side. Every time they went against his laws, every time they went against his nature, every time they went against his statutes and ordinances and his way, they were just stacking up all this weight on the other side until 400 years later, when the children of Israel came into the land, what had happened? The scale had tilted. Because if we continue to add weight to this side, eventually what's going to happen? It's going to mount up, and so it's going to counter the weight that's over here, and the scale is going to tilt back very quickly to the other side. Now, you can take this example and you can apply it to a lot of different situations. Personal, corporate, national, global. I think the same principle works. But the point is, by the time Joshua and the children of Israel came into the land, apparently the scale of justice had tilted in the other direction. Which then means what? Then when Abram was there, what was he extending to the Amorites and to the Canaanites? Mercy. And he set an example before them. Because, ladies and gentlemen, God so loved the world. And when did he begin to love the world? From the beginning. When did he stop loving the world? He has not. And so his purpose and agenda has always been, is, and will remain that he is always searching, reaching out to those who would come to him. And how has he always, typically anyway, reached out to them? Well, through you. He uses you and me, doesn't he? Isn't that right? When he called Israel out of Egypt, he said, "You saw what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bore you unto myself upon eagle's wings. Now, if you will indeed hear my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all peoples, for all the earth is mine. You'll be a kingdom of priests and a holy, or goy kadosh, or a set-apart nation." But what is the inference of being a set-apart nation? Not to hibernate from the nations, but to be a light to those nations, so that they too might see the light and come out of darkness into his marvelous light. When he says, "You are a peculiar treasure unto me above all peoples," the term is segula, which literally means jewels. Precious stones. And by the way, do you know how precious stones are formed? Pressure. Heat and pressure. So, if it's very important that this side of the scale is not continually being filled with weight on a national scale, it's just as important that it's not piled up with weight on a personal level either. In other words, if he extends mercy to me, in turn, what should I do? Extend mercy to others. Does that mean I agree with him? He was merciful to me when I was not agreeable to him. Agreed? Does that mean I condone what they do? No, he was merciful to me when he certainly wasn't condoning what I was doing. Agreed? But if I continue to pile up weight over here, eventually what's going to happen? And I think that's what's happening. Individually and corporately, we have been piling up weight over here. Well, wait a minute. I gave up pork chops. I don't do this and I do that. Well, that's wonderful. But what about those things that are inside that nobody sees? I guess what I'm trying to get across here now is how important is it that we, and especially if we're living in the day and time we think we are, how important is it that we lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us? You know, the thing that prompts us to pray, Father, forgive me of this again. Because a lot of you raised your hand that you've done that. When we started this race, which is not this 100-yard dash, but when we started this race of endurance, there were things that we laid aside very quickly. They were obvious. They needed to go. They were blatant. And as we progressed in our faith, we saw other things. And part of that was for me, you know, Leviticus chapter 11. I mean, I grew up in the South, and if you've never been down south too much, you have to understand that swine is a staple of life. I mean, if it was not the centerpiece of the supper table, there was something that was fried in it, or there was something that had been seasoned with it. And so when you come up against this prohibition, that was an earth-shattering day. And then when I thought I had really overcome something and become super spiritual dude, then he hit me up with no shellfish either. And I'm thinking, what do you want from me? Until I finally realized he wants everything. He wants me to love him with all of my heart, not just some of it. I'm reminded of this young rich man who goes to the Messiah. You know the story. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Well, keep the commandments. Which ones? And he lists the commandments. All these things I've done for my youth, so what am I still lacking? The Messiah didn't say, oh, you're all good. You've checked off all the commandments. You've given up pork. You're doing this. You're using Hebrew, and you're good. He did not say that. He said, if you want to be perfect, which I would suggest that Hebrew term would be tamim. If you want to be complete, you want to be whole, the same term that is used of the Pesach lamb, the same term that is used of Abraham when God says, I am El Shaddai, walk before me and be tamim, be perfect. If you want to be whole, go sell everything you own, give the proceeds to the poor, then come back and follow me. And you know the story. He walks away very despondent. Why? Because he was wealthy. So he kept all the commandments, and yet there was something that had a hold of him, that he was willing to go so far, but no farther, because really what should be emphasized here is he didn't come back and follow the Messiah. So then, in having kept all of the commandments from his youth, and yet not being willing to follow Messiah all the way, did he really keep the commandments? Because what is the first and great command? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strengths. And so apparently he just loved him with some. Now, before we think badly of that young man is the person that we likely see in the mirror every morning when we go and brush our teeth. Because I guarantee you, starting with me, if we make the profession Though all men deny you, I would never deny you. He has a way of orchestrating events that squeezes us, like taking a grape and putting it between his fingers and squeezing it. And whatever's on the inside is going to come out. But I would also say not to embarrass and not to demean and destroy, but to provoke us to see this is who you are. This is what you are. And I want you to overcome this, overcome that, to become what you have been ordained to be, what He has created us to be, individually and corporately. And I'll be the first one to admit I'm not there yet. I would love to tell you I love Him with all my heart. But as soon as I say that, you know what He's going to do? By the way, Peter, later on, after the resurrection, you'll recall that Messiah and Peter had a little conversation where Messiah asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" Peter finally gets a little frustrated. "You know all things. You know that I love you." And then Messiah tells him all 3 times, basically this: take care of my people. Feed my flock. Take care of my lambs. And so what was on the heart of the Messiah that day? His sheep, His people. And why? Because that was what was always on His heart. What do you think is on His heart today? So what should be on our heart? But here's what Peter does after he learns of what's going to be required of him. Essentially, Messiah says, and this is Bill's translation, "Peter, you said 3 times that you didn't know me, even after you said you would never deny me. You're going to get another chance to demonstrate whether or not you really meant what you said and that you would never deny me." And he signified what death Peter would die. So as Peter's taking all this in now, he looks over at this other guy, the one who had laid his head on Messiah's breast on the eve of the crucifixion. He says, "Well, what about him? What are you going to do with him? Isn't he going to have to suffer too?" And you remember what Yeshua said? It's none of your business. It's none of your business what I do through him and to him. If I want that he's still here when I return, what business is that of yours, Peter? You follow me. And so to all those self-appointed judges, we would do well to quit worrying about what everyone else is doing or not doing and start focusing on what is He saying to me and what is it in my life He's trying to correct. Because while we're focused on everyone else, 2 things. We're deflecting all the attention off of us onto them. Never really taking the time to examine our own lives. And the Messiah talks about this. You know, you're going over there telling this other guy he's got a speck in his eye and you got a plank hanging out of yours. If you really want to help him, take care of the plank first. You know that. But when we're focused on everybody else and what they're doing, what they're not doing, we're not focused on us. Our attention is over here. It's elsewhere. But more importantly, I think, if we're focused on everyone else and what they're doing, what they're not doing, we're not keeping our eyes on the Messiah. Because it says here that we are to lay aside every weight. And how important is that? Considering the scale, how important is it that we lay aside every weight? And we're in this race of endurance. There were some things that went very quickly. There are other things that have been laid aside through the process. But I have to tell you, there are weights, there are those things that we haven't let go of. And if we're in this last part of the race, everything's going uphill now. Everything's getting pretty intense. We agree with that. And we may find that the weights we thought we could get by with will be the very thing that keep us, or would be the very things that keep us from finishing this race. And this is a race, folks, that it doesn't count to get within sight of the finish line and quit. It doesn't count. The only thing that counts is enduring to the end, going all of the way. so it says in verse 2 that we are to look into Yeshua, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. If you'll allow me, this is what I get from this. If I have my eyes on you, and you have your eyes on me, we're going to quickly become discouraged. We're going to be weary. You know why? Because it won't take me long to find something wrong with you. It won't take you long to find something wrong with me or this other guy. And while we're examining everyone's flaws and warts and weaknesses, it just, after a while, it just gets more than you can bear. That's why I need to keep my eyes on him. That's why I need to stay focused on him. Peter, since we've been picking on him, got out of a boat, defied the laws of nature and gravity, as long as he kept his eyes on Messiah. But as soon as he got his eyes off and looked at that other guy and their Christmas trees and the chemtrails and the black helicopters and the FEMA camps and the asteroids that are coming to destroy planet Earth and even what's potentially going to happen in September, we got our eyes on all of these things. What happened to him? He sunk. So how important is it that we really keep our eyes on the Messiah? And not just throw that around like a cliche, but genuinely keep our eyes on the Messiah. And I'll be the first to admit, it's difficult in this day and time when you're watching the news and there are people whose faces come across the television screen, and when they do, I start talking to the television. Which is why I have decided I don't watch television anymore. But I listen to the radio, and I had to stop that because I'd be screaming at the dashboard going down the highway, listening to the radio. And so I'm it's a challenge. But that's what we're going to have to do, because you see, not the things I know. It's not going to be the things I know that are going to see me through the days ahead. If, and I say if, some of the things that people have predicted or may happen next month, if they do happen, number one, with all the worrying and all the consideration that we're given and all the obsession that we have for it, how many of you have the power to stop it? There's not one thing you and I can do. If the Creator has determined to judge certain systems and governments and countries, there's not a thing in the world you and I can do about it except get our eyes on the Messiah. That's all we can do. And if it rains on the just and the unjust and a storm is coming, then we're probably going to feel the heat. We're probably going to feel that. We're probably going to be subject to some of that. And I dare say that whatever we are subjected to is the Creator's way of squeezing us and squeezing all the things that are unfruitful from our lives, individually and corporately. What's my alternative? I got to keep my eyes on Him. Because for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. In other words, he saw the big picture. He understood what the Father's purpose and plan was. In Luke chapter 9, it says that when it came time for him to be delivered up, that he set his face to go up to Jerusalem. He determined, he focused himself to go and to do what the Father had sent him to do. Because up until that time, he said, I only say what the Father tells me to say. I only do what the Father tells me to do. And so when it came time, he focused. And oh, by the way, in that same passage, he sent messengers before his face, it says, to go into a Samaritan village who would not receive him because his face was set to go to Jerusalem. Apparently they got offended. So what did the sons of thunder do? James and John. They got offended for him, and they said, do you want us to call fire down upon them and consume them like Elijah did? Now, you've met people like this. They're quite willing to dispense judgment. when they're offended. And the thing is, they'll be offended on behalf of him. What did Yeshua say to those two disciples? He rebuked them. And he said, you do not know what manner of spirit you are of. The Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. You see, because he kept his focus and went on up to Jerusalem, it became possible for those same Samaritans that James and John were so offended with, it became possible for those same Samaritans to come to understand that Yeshua is the Messiah and be saved. Because he kept his focus on what the Father had given him to do. So again, what's on the Father's heart? His people. He so loved the world that he gave of himself. He gave his only Son. He gave everything. So what does he want to put on our heart? What should be on our heart? Whatever's on his. And how far are we willing to go? Because he's given everything. And so what does he ask in return? That we be willing to give everything. And that includes our opinions. So, we consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become discouraged in your souls. You have not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin. In other words, how many of us have scars in our wrist or healed where somebody drove a spike through it because we were that committed to the Father's purpose? How many of us have a scar in our side where a lance was thrown up in there because we were that committed to what the Father was doing? Oh, by the way, most of these people being beheaded by ISIS, not Messianics. A lot of them Catholics. Now put that in your theological pipe and smoke it. Will not deny their faith to the point of death. Now, who's going to sit in judgment over those people because they didn't say the name right? You have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord. Do not be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and he scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. If you'll allow me to kind of boil this down. We want to be chastened. We want to be reproved. We want to be disciplined. Because if we are not reproved, if we're not disciplined, if we're not chastened, then we're not his children. Then we're not his sons and daughters. Because even Messiah, he echoes what's stated here, that he chastens who he loves. He doesn't choose perfect people. He perfects those he chooses. And how does he typically perfect them? He chastens them. He disciplines. He reproves. He allows them to go through things. And he doesn't allow it for their destruction, to embarrass them. He doesn't do that. He does it so that they will grow and they will mature, that they will overcome themselves. My biggest adversary is not Hasatan. My biggest adversary is Bill. That's my biggest adversary. If I could get that guy to die, if I could get him to hush his opinions and quit doing what he wants to do and quit thinking what he wants to think. Now it says, furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. The way I'll explain this, the way I like to explain this, is I'll use my upbringing. I grew up in a day and time where we had these things called spankings. And my dad had this thing called a belt. You remember those days, some of you, right? Now, my mother's preferred weapon of choice, rod of correction, was a switch. Did they have switches up north? Okay. So if you grew up understanding what a switch was, and I'm not talking about the light switch on the wall, young people, then you know what the switch dance is, don't you? Switch dance is when you get in trouble and mama says, go out in the back and cut me a switch. Anybody have to do that? And so one person besides me, good gracious. Well, you go out in the backyard, and the thing is, you have to cut a switch that is sturdy enough that it's not going to break, because if it breaks, she's going to be really mad now. But it can't be so strong that it's going to break your spine. So you have to get really good at picking the perfect switch, you know. So you go get a switch, and then you go in the house, and she collected us all in the hallway. I had a brother and a sister, and usually the way it worked out, if one was going to get it, the rest of them were probably going to get it too. I was the oldest. I got to go first. So she would corral us in this hallway, and so when she'd take that switch and go, like, you know, like this, the first thing you want to do is protect yourself. And so you put your hand in the way. And usually you get swatted across the hand first thing. And so she says, move your hand. You know, move your hand. You know, and so you start running around in circles. And your mother's chasing you around in circles trying to find a place to put the switch without hitting your hand. Move your hand. I'm not going to do it anymore. No, you're not going to do it anymore. You know, my sister used to take her hands, put them under her backside, sit on the floor, and spin around. Hoping my mother would get dizzy enough to just call it off, I guess. I don't know. One time I ran from her, and I ran up to the treehouse, and she was right on my heels, and I could hear that switch. I run up into the tree, and she says, you better get down from there. I said, no, I'm not coming down from there. Well, I'm going to call your daddy. No! We don't want him cutting in on the dance. Because he doesn't use a switch. So anyway, that's the switch dance. All right, so here's why I'm saying this. My parents disciplined me sometimes justly. Sometimes because they just got mad. And they may be overreacted. Or they disciplined out of frustration. And guess what? I've done that too. To the point I have to go back. I've had, in times past, gone back to my sons. Because I don't whip my daughter. She's too sweet. But I've gone to my sons from time to time and said, you know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I shouldn't have said that. I overreacted. I shouldn't have raised my voice. I was frustrated. And apologize. Our Father will never have to do that. Because He's just. And He doesn't allow us to go through things individually, corporately, that it is not for our profit. It is always in our best interest so that we may be partakers of His holiness. The way I look at things, when the Creator told Israel, let them build me a sanctuary so I can dwell among them. The first thing that pops in my mind when I see that is a problem. Because if He's going to dwell among them and He's holy, where's the problem? They're not. And so there's all these things that they had to address and had to be careful to do because He's holy, they're not. And so the closer you got to Him, the more set apart you had to be. And there were divisions. There was the nations, first of all, and then there's the nation of Israel that's set apart from the nations. But within Israel, there are the Leviim who are set apart from the Israelites. But within the Leviim, there are the Kohanim who are set apart from those who are set apart from those who are set apart. And the point is, the closer you got to Him, the more set apart you had to be. The more of you that had to die. If you're going to be partakers of His holiness. So why does He chasten us? Why does He reprove us? Why does He bring us through these things? So that we will die to ourselves. That we will die not just to what we eat, but to what we eat in a non-physical way. Not just to what we wear, but what people see in us and our attitudes and our actions and how we interact with them. Now, no chastening seems to be joyful for the present. We can all attest to that, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. All right, why am I getting into all this? Because I am wholeheartedly convinced that judgment has come to his house. I don't know if I agree with you, Bill. So be it. But I'm convinced that judgment has come to his house. And it's not going to be limited to what everybody sees on the outside. But he's going to get down to the nitty-gritty, to where we really are and who we really are. I believe we're being squeezed. I would believe we're being pressed. You don't have to raise your hand, but if you want to, you may. Does anybody in here feel like that what's been going on in your life or in your family's life, 6 months, year and a half, 2 years, it's been more than just the day in, day out routine of life, but it's just like you're being squeezed. It's just like you feel like the very life is being squeezed out of you, and you're, Father, what's going on? What's going on? Why is this happening? Where are you? I certainly have. Judgment has come to his house, but in preparation for what he's getting ready to do elsewhere. So then verse 18 says in Hebrews 12, I don't know how long I have. I'm just going to go until you throw something at me. But verse 18, for you have not come to the mountain that may be touched and that burn with fire, into blackness and darkness and tempest and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that the word should not be spoken to them anymore. Now, we know what this is talking about. Mount Sinai, the children of Israel are there. Not the nations, the children of Israel. They're at the base of the mountain. The Creator comes down, enveloped in this thick, dark cloud. He speaks from the midst of the cloud. They hear him speak. I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You're not to have any other gods before me. No graven images of anything in the heavens or the earth or the seas, etc. And as he begins to speak to them, they begin to tremble. And they go to Moses. You speak to him. Don't let him speak to us. Because if he continues to speak to us, we're going to die. And that's true. Because the Creator, when he speaks to us, he's never going to speak in a way that appeases our flesh. Has anyone ever prayed this prayer? Father, I really need you to speak to me. If you have never spoken to me ever before, I really need you to speak to me now. I have. And you know what? Every time he's spoken to me under those conditions, I've never liked what he had to talk about. Because he wanted to talk about me. He didn't want to talk about what I perceived to be the problem, that person over there, or that group over there, or that situation over there. If you would just fix them, fix that, life would be wonderful. He never wants to talk about them. He always wants to talk about me. It's like him telling Peter, what I do with that guy is none of your business. You follow me. It says in verse 20 that these people, and by the way, once again, not the nations, God's people, they could not endure what was commanded. That's what the writer of Hebrews says. That the reason they had this response is because they couldn't endure what the Creator was commanding them. Now, Messianics would like to jump on that one and say, well, that's all the church people who are hanging tinsel on their trees and coloring eggs in the springtime and eating pork and all those things. Okay, so be it. But if we are so confident that we have the truth, then aren't we even more responsible to attend and to respond to every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord God? Even more so than those who have not come to that place yet. Look at it this way. This book, by and large, is not addressing the world. By and large, this book addresses who? His people. Judgment comes to the world, but where does it come to first? His people. Right? So if we have the truth, then who's at the top of his list of who he's going to be dealing with? So what I'm getting at, folks, is, we like to deflect all the attention and focus off of us onto all those other people who don't know what we know. We're like teenagers. We have attained all wisdom and all knowledge. We know everything. Silly father. But we need to mature to the point that, ladies and gentlemen, what's on our Father's heart is what's in our heart. And what's important to him becomes what's important to us. And who he is, in that he is merciful and compassionate. And that's how he is to be perceived and wishes to be perceived. And therefore, that is how we should be perceived as well. Slow to anger. Like him who takes no pleasure in the destruction of the wicked, neither should we. And admit it to yourself. We know how we are when these things happen, like Katrina. Well, you know why that happened? Because all that wickedness that's going on down there in that city. That's God judged that wicked, wicked city. How does that compare to Abraham's attitude when God was getting ready to go to the cities of the plain? Was that what Abraham was saying? Good, destroy them. When the Creator says to Moses, step aside, I'm going to wipe these people out, and I will raise up a nation from you. Go ahead, you can admit it. Some of you, if you'd been Moses, you'd have jumped out of the way. I probably would have too. Because they're a bunch of knuckleheads. They are wearing me out. Yeah, I would have wanted to call fire down on them too. And that's exactly why we didn't get picked to be Moses. Because Moses was a meek man. You want to follow what Moses wrote? You have to follow what Moses was. He was the meekest man on earth. Are you getting what I'm talking about here? We've come to the time and place, ladies and gentlemen, that if all that we're about is don't hang tinsel, don't color eggs, don't eat pork, don't use any names other than Hebrew, if that's all we are, then we're just another religion. And I'm tired of religion. It's about relationship. First with him, and then with one another. And so then we'll go to verse 25. It says that see, and he's talking to us, see that you do not refuse him who speaks. For if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven. When those people awoke on the third day in Exodus 19 to this great sight, and they heard the thunderings and the shofar blasts and all these different things, they trembled. They were afraid. They didn't want him to speak, and he was only shaking earth at that time. Now, I personally believe that part of that display was intended to instill some godly fear in them, because up until that point in time, they were more afraid of Yul Brynner than they were the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? They were more afraid of Pharaoh. Young people didn't get that joke. All right, so. But true, they feared Pharaoh more than they feared him. And so he was, in part, instilling a godly fear in them. I believe that anyway. But they've trembled. They were afraid, and his voice only shook the earth. But much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth. But now he has promised, saying, yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also heaven. And he's quoting Haggai chapter 2 here. When he shakes heaven and earth, and that he is going to shake all nations, he says. Now, if he's going to shake heaven and earth the next time he speaks, that means everything's going to be shaken. Or if you'll allow me to put it this way, he's going to judge everything. Everything's going to be shaken. Every nation, and a lot of people are anticipating that this nation is about to be judged. It may be. No doubt. It's coming. It's just a matter of when. All right? Every nation is going to be judged. Every nation is going to be shaken. But every denomination is going to be shaken too. Not just the Baptists, not just the Lutherans, the Pentecostals, the Messianics. Everything gets shaken. Everything gets sifted. Every institution is going to be shaken. Every constitution is going to be shaken. Every industry and every individual, you and me. Everything's going to be shaken. And where does it begin? In His house. If that's the case, I want you to consider something that Messiah talks about in Luke chapter 21. In verse 25, I think it is, he says that there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. Well, everybody's looking to next month, right? Everybody's looking for the blood moon, the next blood moon. And those things are there for signs and for seasons. He puts them up there to get our attention. But if I was going to pontificate on what it means, I want you to consider this. If you understand that the sun in the beginning, on day 4, was the greater light that was to govern the day, and the moon was the lesser light that governs the night or the darkness, and consider that the sun generates light but the moon reflects it, then you have a picture of the sun, the S-O-N, and the body. He is the light of the world. But what does he say to us? We are the light of the world. How so? We can't generate our own light, but we are to reflect His. And we can only do that if our face is set toward Him. If we are looking unto Yeshua, who is the author and the finisher of our faith. That's how we reflect His light. But what happens when you have a quote-unquote blood moon? The sun is here. The moon is here. And of course the earth revolves around the sun as it rotates on its axis. And the moon revolves around the earth. But the moon doesn't rotate on an axis. The same side of the moon is always facing the same way. So that means this. When we have this blood moon, the moon is positioned here. The earth is positioned here. And the sun is positioned here. And so as the earth comes between the sun and the moon, the eclipse occurs and then you get this reddish hue. By the way, Edom is the Hebrew word, which is related to Edom. And we know who Edom is. Right? Esau, because when he was born, he was a red. He was ruddy. He was reddish. All right? So if this is the sun, and we're the ones to reflect the light of the sun, then how do you get this reddish hue on the face of the moon? The world gets in the way. There's something that is preventing the moon from looking directly on the Messiah, so to speak. The world gets in the way. There's something that gets in the way. And that's what causes this reddish hue. In other words, we end up looking more like Esau than we do Israel. So then, there are signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, distress of nations with perplexity. Would it be fair to say the nations are distressed right now? And I think they're definitely perplexed. So there are things in verse 25 that are happening in the heavens. And there are things that are happening on the earth. The sea and the waves roaring, it says in verse 25. And then it goes on to verse 26 and it says that men's hearts fail them from fear and the expectation of the things that are coming upon the earth. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And so in verse 26, the powers of the heavens are shaken. There's something going on in the heavens, but there's something going on the earth too. And that's what causes these men's hearts to fail them. So my point, what Messiah talks about in Luke 21 is, I believe, is exactly what the writer of Hebrews is referring to in chapter 12, which is what Haggai refers to in chapter 2. Things being shaken up here and things being shaken down here. All right, are you with me? All right. But if Messiah's return is, or the days leading up to Messiah's return is likened unto the days of Noah when men were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage, on one level understood to mean that people are going about their daily business. They're oblivious to what's going on. They're marrying, giving in marriage, eating, drinking, and knew not until the flood came and swept them all away. Even though Noah was a preacher of righteousness, they knew not until the flood came and swept them all away. That means they were not really paying attention. They were oblivious to what was about to happen. And Messiah says that will be descriptive of the days leading up to his coming, which I believe that's the days we're in. Then we can take away from that the people out here of the world are going to be doing what? Marrying, giving in marriage, eating, drinking, going about their stuff, and will not be aware of what's about to hit them. Would you agree? Well, if that's the case, who are the men whose hearts are failing them from fear and from the expectation of the things that are coming upon the earth if these people out here are oblivious to what's coming upon the earth? I'll give you my opinion. It's all those who have their eyes fixed on all these things, which means they do not have their eyes fixed on the Messiah. My opinion, it is those who love him with some of their heart, but not all, because you see, they have allowed the world to get in the way. It's like those who are scattered among the stony ground. They grow up, but it has no depth of earth. And as soon as the heat comes, they melt away. Or those who fall among the thorns and thistles because of the cares of life, they get choked out. Just my opinion. Verse 27, now this yet once more indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken as the things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. Let me boil that down. The primary reason that God is going to shake everything, or if you want to use this word, judge everything, is not so much to destroy the wicked as much as it is to reveal the righteous. Because it says, removal of those things that are being shaken as of things that are made, so that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. He will remove those things that are built on sand to reveal those things that are established upon the rock. He will remove those things that offend to reveal those things that are righteous. Romans 8, Paul talks about how the creation is groaning and it's manifesting all these birth pangs, and that the creation is in earnest anticipation, not of the destruction of the wicked, but of the revealing of the sons of God. Now, why would he want to put an emphasis on that? To go, nanny, nanny, boo, boo, you missed it, you didn't get it. Or so that those who are groping through the chaos and the destruction and everything they've ever placed their confidence in, when it's gone, that there will still be someone, something standing that is established on the rock, that can be trusted, that is sure, that they can go to. And that's where you and I come in. Because if he has always used people like you and me, imperfect people that he perfects, if that's going to be the way it's going to be at the very end, and we have no reason to believe it isn't, and if we're living at the very end, it would strongly suggest that that's the role that you and I are to play in this day and time. And if that's the case, then you and I need to be standing when everything else is falling. You and I need to be standing when everything else is crumbling. You and I do not need to be fixated on all of these other things that could happen, that might happen, maybe that will happen. Because if we're fixated on that, ladies and gentlemen, those are the things we're going to gravitate toward, and they become a big black hole. And my understanding is light can't escape a black hole. And so how important is it going to be for me to stay focused on the Messiah? Not you, and not you on me. Because again, if we're looking at one another, we're going to start picking one another apart. It's going to be really easy to be critical of one another. That isn't to say that we condone this or we advocate that or we're given allowances for that. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that if I focus more on him, he's going to reveal in me the things that need to be purged from my life, and he's going to accentuate those things that are fruitful in my life, that I am going to be better positioned to judge righteously and not pervert justice. Because you see, I'm still in this mortal body. I'm still in this corruptible flesh. And even though I've been born again, Bill can't be trusted. And you can insert your name in that too. It can't be Bill. It has to be Messiah in me, working through me. And that goes for us corporately as well. So he removes those things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. He wants the world to see his sons and daughters. But you know why they're still standing then? Is because previous to that, he has reproved them. He has chastened them. He has disciplined them. He has judged their house. He's visited their lives and their homes. And he's squeezed and he's pressed. And he has worked through them to remove all those things that aren't fruitful. And that's why, exactly why, I believe in my heart that judgment has come to his house. Because you see, judgment is soon to come to the nations. And he so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him should not perish. But let me just get you to consider this. Not in the same way he gave us the Messiah. And yet, he's offering his sons and daughters to the world now. That we can be in the reflection of his light in this day and time. But we all have to come to the same place Messiah did before he went to that tree. That we can sincerely pray and mean, not my will, but your will be done. And what was his will? That the Messiah would lay aside any personal opinions, agendas, and let the Father's will be carried forth. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. You remember Paul prayed on several occasions that Messiah would take away this thorn from his flesh. What was Messiah's response to him? My grace is sufficient for you. Okay. I'm very glad that his grace is sufficient for us. Aren't you? His compassions are new every morning, and I, for one, am very grateful for that. But let me ask you this. How sufficient is our grace for one another? And that seems to be important because the writer says, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably. Hinting, at the very least, that I'm not going to serve him acceptably if I don't fear him to the point that what's important to him becomes important to me. So it seems that we're going to have to be gracious with one another. Namely, because he's been gracious to us. If he is merciful, how should we be? Does he condone wickedness? Does he? No, he doesn't. Is he still merciful? Does he accommodate the wicked? But is he still merciful? Do you understand what I'm saying here? We want to be critical. Because we think, oh no, we got to step in here. There are some situations that we do. I realize that. Paul wrote to the congregation at Corinth. He said, look, you got a guy that's having relations with his father's wife. I'm not even there. I've already judged the situation. You need to get this guy from among the congregation. And it seems to me the reason Paul was saying that and making such a strong statement is because he understood that there is a cancerous cell in the body. And if you allow that cancerous cell to remain there, it will eventually destroy the entire body. Okay? I understand that. Get it. But when we make decisions like that, we better be making them with righteous judgment. Not based on what my opinion is, but based on what truth is. All right? So, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. For our God is a consuming fire. Now, I'm almost done here. But when I read that our God is a consuming fire, several things come to mind. The first one is this. Again, because He wants us to be partakers of His holiness, that means He wants us to draw near to Him. That's really what's being said there. But if I'm going to draw near to Him, it's going to become uncomfortable for me, and particularly where my flesh is concerned. Because the closer I get to Him, the more uncomfortable it becomes, and the more I want to just pause and say, I can go this far, but I just can't really afford to go any further. Like the young rich man who says, I've done everything Moses said to do, but that I can't do. With you, it might be this. With me, it might be that. But whatever it is, we have got to get to the place that we're willing to go even closer. To allow that all-consuming fire to devour everything within us. And again, I'm not talking about the outward things. Men look on the outward things, but the Father is looking where? He's looking on the heart. He's looking at the inner man, because that's where all the secrets are. That's where all the deep, devious thoughts can hide out. And those are the things that need to be exposed and be dispersed. So that's what that consuming fire does. But also when I read this, here's what comes to mind. The hills melt like wax at the coming of the Lord. Hills, mountains are perceived to be pictures of things that are eternal, things that are immovable, things that you can place your confidence and trust in. For instance, David said, I will look into the hills. From whence cometh my help? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. If you've ever been to Israel and been to Jerusalem, then the city of David and even the old city is basically surrounded on three sides anyway by hills, mountains. So if you consider David is in that old city of David and he's looking around Jerusalem at the hills surrounding it, what you have are physical, defensive barriers. Things that would have been looked upon as an asset. If we're going to build a city here, look what we've got. We've got hills surrounding us, and basically we've got high places around here, so we can use this as defensive positions and as a barrier. And so you might be tempted to put your confidence and trust in those things that are eternal, things that you consider to be immovable. But David says, I look into the hills, from whence cometh my help? Not the hills. My help comes from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth, the one who made those hills. That's where my help comes from. You see, we live in a day and time when people think that their help comes from Capitol Hill. My help doesn't come from Capitol Hill. I'm not looking to the government to see me through, because there comes a day when every government fails and every kingdom have become the kingdoms of our God and of His Messiah. So David makes it clear that our help comes from the one who is the maker of heaven and earth. And so all of those things that man considers to be immovable, eternal, trustworthy, things that we can place our confidence in, whatever that may be, some people put it in the dollar, because the dollar was as good as gold at one point in time. That doesn't work out so well anymore, does it? And so some people shifted to gold or to silver and things like that. Well, that's fine, but you can't eat gold and silver. And so one day, and I know that the context is slightly different, but people cast their gold and silver into the streets because they perceive it as being worthless. Some people put their confidence and trust in constitutions. But constitutions can be undermined, skirted around, and shredded, and just simply ignored. Or whatever it may be. But anything and everything that we place our confidence in other than Him melts like wax. But that same consuming fire can inhabit a bush And a bush would be something that man could remove quite easily. Something that just could be cut down in an instant. And yet the Creator can inhabit something as fragile as a bush that submits itself to Him. And the bush can burn, but not be consumed. And that's who I want to be. That's who I want to be. That He purges from me those things that are ugly and grotesque, and those things that I want to pretend aren't there, and that if you knew they were there, you would think, why in the world is he holding the microphone? I've thought about that myself many, many times. I've kind of kidded about it, but there's always a little truth in jest. I wondered was I standing too close to somebody that you intended to zap with this, and they moved real quick and it hit me, and you're like, well, I'm stuck with a cloud. What am I going to do? You know, I wondered. You know me. You know where I come from. You know my family. But I'm reminded once again that God has never chosen perfect people. But He always perfects those that He chooses. If you feel like your life is one of late, that you're being squeezed and pressed, and one thing after the other is piling up, and you feel like the very life sometimes is being squeezed from you, then you're the person that I came to talk to. Because that's where I'm at. But I've come to understand, I believe that judgment has come to His house. And when we use the word judgment, we think destruction. And yes, there is that element to it. But there's also the restoration. Because anytime there's restoration, prior to that, there is a little bit of demolition. Because you have to get rid of the things that aren't fruitful. You have to discard those things that are weak and fragile. Because if you're going to restore something, it's with the intent that it be strong and that it stands. Several years ago, I snapped my Achilles tendon in this left leg. And it hurt. And I had surgery, and later on, after the surgery, I'm talking to the doctor, and I was a little gun shy. I mean, every time I put this foot down, I was a little nervous because all I had done was just planted this foot, and it snapped, and so I was really kind of gun shy. And when I got out of the boot, and I really had to wear shoes for the first time, and started walking on this leg, and I was nervous because I was thinking, is it going to hold? And so I asked the surgeon. I said, what are the chances this thing's going to snap again? And she said, well, I can't guarantee you that your tendon will never snap again. I can just guarantee you it will never snap in the same place because it is stronger now than it ever was. Think of what I'm saying. Something that is being restored is stronger. Tabernacle of David. What's the inspiration for that? Amos chapter 9, verse 11. In that day I will raise up the fallen tabernacle of David. I will what? Repair its breaches. You know what that means, right? All the rips and tears. In other words, before He raises it up and restores it as in days of old, the first thing He does is He goes and He begins to put those things that have been separated and divided and torn and ripped. He goes and repairs those things first. Because, well, that's why judgment comes. So that He can restore. You know, judgment's not necessarily a bad word. It really kind of depends on what side of the law you happen to be. When a plaintiff and a defendant go and stand before a judge, and in this case, the only righteous judge, he will not make a decision based on what his feelings are that day. He won't make a decision based on emotions or cultural trends and societal whims or this seems like the right thing to do. He will make a decision based on what is written. What is law? And so if you're standing on that if you're standing on truth, if you've built on the rock, then judgment's not necessarily a bad thing. It can mean vindication. Now, if you're not, yeah, it's going to be a bad day. But at least then you'll know. This is the truth. If he removes everything that's false and faulty, and all that's left is what's true and pure, then at least you know, and you have something to move toward. So, yes, destruction is part of the judgment, but restoration is as well, because he never destroys anything unless he intends to restore it. He never breaks down unless he intends to build up. He never scatters stones unless he intends to gather stones. I'll close with this. All of this has been to lead us up to this point, and here's where I'm going to leave you. If you look at verse 1 of chapter 13, and let's pretend for a moment that 13 that separates the chapters isn't there, and just read it as it was written, within the context of God shaking, God choosing and perfecting and chastening, and don't turn away from him who speaks, and he's going to shake everything. Taking all that into consideration, and God's a consuming fire, look what he says now. Let brotherly love continue. Or some, I think, say remain. Insinuating what? That when all is said and done, when everything that can be shaken has been shaken, and everything that's not worthy of standing has fallen, you know what's still going to be standing? Brotherly love. Notice that your pet doctrine isn't there. It might not still be standing. I don't know. But what I can say dogmatically is brotherly love will still be standing. So how important is this whole brotherly love thing? Actually, the Messiah says that, the first and great command is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and another that is like unto it, not secondary to it, mind you, like unto it. And what is that? You love your neighbor as yourself. And that comes so naturally to us. Doesn't it? It just exudes from us. It just seeps out of our being because it's just so natural to love you. No, it's hard. And the reason is because I can see you. I can hear you. And you me. And so when we're in that close contact, and especially if we're focused on one another all the time, we're always looking at that other one. What are they going to do? Where's his seat? How come he doesn't have a beard? How come he says the name wrong? Oh, whatever. We're always focused on one another like that. We pick one another apart. We become critical of one another. And we end up doing exactly what Messiah said not do. Judge not, lest you be judged. You want to judge people that way? That's how you're going to be judged. In other words, if you're going to pick people apart, then guess what he's going to do? He's going to pick you apart. You know what? I want to be merciful. And you know why? I have an ulterior motive. Because I want him to be merciful to me. And that means, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have to love you as I love myself. I'm going to have to genuinely understand what it is to have brotherly love for one another. Because at the end of the day, if I don't love my neighbor as myself, do I really love God with all my heart? Does that mean I condone what my neighbor does? No. Does that mean I agree with it? No. I am going through something right now where I am learning what it means to love somebody I really don't like. But to take steps and take action and do things that goes against what this is saying to me, because I don't like them. I don't like anything about them. And yet, I have got to learn to love them. That doesn't mean accommodate, condone. It just to love them. Because isn't that what Messiah did for us? All right, well, I have flapped my gums now for a while. But I'm sharing with you what God is dealing with me about. And you just got to hear it. Because, as I said, if you are that person that I described, you're the person I came to talk to, because that's exactly what I feel like. And here's what's coming out as he's doing all this squeezing. All those things that are really on the inside. And so he's brought a parade of situations and people into my path. Remember this person, Bill? Remember what they said about you? Remember what they did to you? What are you going to do? What do you want me to do? You know what I want you to do, Bill. Okay. I know I'm probably being really simplistic, but this is what's going on in my life. Because how am I going to be able to love these people out here if I haven't learned to love my brother? Well, with that, I'll hush, because I could go on and on and on, but I think I would just be kind of belaboring the point. But I do believe that we have entered into a season of judgment. And ladies and gentlemen, what little bit of Hebrew I know and what little bit of understanding I have of this word, intellectually speaking, it's not going to get me through what's coming. The only thing that's going to get me through what's coming is my relationship with the Messiah and His mercy and His compassion. And so I choose to sow mercy and compassion so that when I need it, it will be there for me. That is how I am determined to judge. Father, to the best of my ability, I've shared what you placed upon my heart, and now I just pray that where I have fallen short, where I have failed, and where I've been unable to articulate the spirit of this message, I pray that your Spirit will speak, and that your Spirit will reveal the word within the words, and that your Spirit will convey the message that is within the message as only you can do. And that your Spirit, as it visits us, that you will purge from our hearts and lives those things that are unprofitable, those things that are unfruitful. Reveal to us those things about ourselves that need to be addressed, and those things that need to be overcome, so that we will be the people that you've called us to be, and that we will perform the function for which you've placed us here for, in this fellowship and others like it around this country and around the world. We pray, Father, and seek your mercy. We seek your forgiveness. We seek your long suffering, because we know that we are living in very perilous times, and we know that judgment is at the door. We don't know when, we don't know how exactly, but we know. And so if judgment has come to your house and to your people, Father, we humble ourselves before you, and we ask your forgiveness of our sins against ourselves, our sins against one another, and our sins, most importantly, against you. And that you would find a people who are humble before you, who are compassionate with one another, and who are willing to come to the place in their lives that they can truly say, not our will, but yours be done. And so we now commit this unto you in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah, our Redeemer, our King. Amen and amen. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Thank you. Wow, that was great, huh, guys? Man. Boy, talking about having your heart with the finger right on there going, yeah, that was for me. That was for me. Just so you all know that'll be uploaded to the website. Be sure to direct your friends there, your family, your loved ones. This is a message far bigger than the 60 or 70 people that are here today. This needs to go out. This is I truly believe this is the Father's heart on the matter of how His people are and how they've been treating one another. We're going to send the basket around. I'd ask that you would support Bill generously in what he does, because this is what he does. He goes around and around and teaches us how to get better and how to do more. You can make it out to Shorashim or Bill Cloud. Yep. And then anything that accidentally hits our donation box will be forwarded to Bill today. So I'll walk back there and we'll hand her out. And then after that, you guys are dismissed to go downstairs and time of fellowship and hang out and visit, get to know one another, talk with people. Anything, eat more. There's always more to eat. All right. Thank you, guys.